And ahead of this matchup with the Pacers, we bring in Anthony Slater, who covers the team for The Athletic. Anthony, the Warriors beat the Pacers by 32 in January. That, of course, was just 5 days after losing Victor Oladipo. So what makes the difference in this matchup against a Pacers team that has surprisingly held on to playoff positioning?
Yeah, I remember in Indiana, there were two teams in kind of different situations where the Pacers were reeling emotionally off the Oladipo news. You mentioned that was 5 days after, and they were just still kind of trying to solve themselves. It's pretty clear they've become a bit more comfortable playing without Oladipo. And then on the Warriors side, I remember that was at the end of the first road trip that DeMarcus Cousins was back. It was a 5-0 road trip. That was the 5th game. And I remember after the game, Steve Kerr said this is the most focused, on a day-to-day basis he'd seen his Warriors in maybe 2 seasons. They aren't as normal, as focused on a day-to-day basis now, although they've been better. They were pretty good on that last road trip, but it's not the same Warriors that we saw in Indianapolis either.
And Slate, speaking of that focus, who is that guy off the bench that we say needs to step up or is going to make those big shots? We saw in the first championship, you saw a guy like Barbosa, you saw Mo Spates come off the bench, make shots, obviously having Durant. Last year, Nick Young had a big game, I think was in Houston to help them get over the hump. Who is that guy or two this year that they really need to step up because none of the stars are going to be stars?
Yeah, Iguodala has actually had a really good season. They have the best defensive rating when he's on the floor. He's kind of the known commodity, though, and people almost don't view him as a bench player. But I'd say, Livingston, he's kind of had a season where he's looked a bit aged and he's getting older in years, but he was pretty good on that last road trip. He was good in Houston, good in Oklahoma City. Those were 2 huge wins without Kevin Durant. So if he can be sturdy down the stretch, if they can get, maybe some bench threes from guys like Quinn Cook, some energy from Jordan Bell. Now Andrew Bogut starting tonight slides back into their bench, which should help the depth. Then maybe they'll look a little bit sturdier moving forward.
Hey, Anthony, Vinny Del Negro here. The Bogut signing is interesting, obviously there for the first championship. What are you expecting from him? How many minutes you think he'll play? What do you think he'll actually give them? The way they score the ball, we know he can set screens, very good passer, but what are you expecting from Bogut?
Yeah, I think it's matchup based. He had to start his first 2 games back because Cousins was out with a foot injury. Cousins returns tonight, and Bogut I think is going to kind of share those backup duties with Kevon Looney. I think they want Bogut more against bigger centers. You saw him play Karl Anthony Towns the other night, and while Towns is big, Towns is also quick on the perimeter. And this is a different league than Bogut left. He hasn't played in a season and a half, and Towns kind of exploited him a bit with his speed. So I think that's more of like a Looney type matchup. Whereas Bogut, you kind of mentioned it, his screening, his passing, his comfort level. It's just such a luxury for them to sign a guy who's played with all of these superstars before. So spot minutes. DeMarcus Cousins this season, I think he's played about 20 games. He's gotten foul trouble in probably like 14 of those games. So that's another reason. They just need him for insurance if DeMarcus gets in foul trouble.
And when we look ahead to the postseason, we talk a lot about home court advantage, but that doesn't seem to be something that the Warriors had concerned themselves with, at least in these last couple of seasons. How important do you think that home court advantage could be over the Denver Nuggets, say sitting just a half game back as opposed to watching the Rockets run away with it with that 7-game advantage last season?
I think it's a motivator down the stretch, and Steve Kerr likes that there's a motivator. Down the stretch, they went 7-10 last year because, as you mentioned, they were kind of stuck in that 2nd seed, and it almost felt like the preseason the last few weeks. As far as how much do they need it, I don't think they need home court that much. If Denver even does get to the West Finals, which I know there is some skepticism within the Warriors, then they feel like they could win at least 1 road game in Denver in the playoffs. They won Game 1 in Houston last year in the West Finals, and they won a Game 7 in Houston. So it's understandably a very confident team that's actually played better on the road this season.
Anthony, you're doing great work with The Athletic. Thanks for taking the time before the game.
Yeah, thanks for having me.